Hello, my name is Jonathan Forster, and welcome to the Multi-Story Thinking Podcast. I'm an interior designer and educator. My job is to improve quality of life and productivity by helping people to create beautiful and practical spaces to live and work in. The Multi-Story Thinking Podcast takes an educational slant to the interior design world. So sit back, relax, as we help unravel the mysteries of interior design. Oliver is an industry-recognised expert in the field of sustainable architecture and interior design. His eponymous company, Oliver Heath Design, is a research-led sustainable architecture and interior design practice focused on improving health and well-being in the built environment. Oliver has presented television programmes since 1998, working for numerous channels including the BBC, ITV, Channel 4, Discovery Channel and Norway's TV2. Most recently for the BBC's DIY SOS, where his show was BAFTA nominated. I spoke to Oliver in early 2021 via Zoom with my co-host Kay Hanson. In this episode we learn about the 14 patterns of biophilic design, how biophilic design approaches are shifting our design thinking. We discover how access to nature has shaped Oliver's design approach, and the role of TV shows in the democratisation of design, and how to make people smile by working in a jungle.
Going down to the beach and running, or going mountain biking up in the downs or whatever, it's just like lifesaver, isn't it?
Yeah.
A variety of spaces rather than just the local park.
So you're Brighton?
I am, yeah.
So lots of kind of outdoor spaces for you to kind of go and...
Yeah, got lots of different outdoor spaces that are quite accessible.
Yeah.
So that's really good. Yeah. And but Jonathan and I know each other from our sort of Brick Lane, Shoreditch days when we lived around the corner from each other.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
That was such a long time ago, wasn't it?
I guess I moved out about 2003 or something like that.
Okay. Golden years they were, weren't they? In a way.
Yeah.
It felt like it were.
Yeah.
But where did you have your studio? In Shoreditch somewhere?
It was on Brick Lane, Bacon Street, just around the corner from the bagel shop. Yeah, right by the bagel shop, so around the corner from Redchurch Street.
Yeah.
So I lived there and I worked there. We had 2 floors of a warehouse. That warehouse, which is still there, amazingly, in amongst all the unrecognisable aspects of Brick Lane.
Yeah, it hasn't yet been bulldozed and turned into a 37-storey.
No, like literally everything else around it has. But number 14 Bacon Street is still a decrepit old warehouse. It's amazing it stayed there.
It's going to have its blue plaque, isn't it? Oliver Heath.
Oh, it'd be nice. Yeah. But it's weird going back because we used to like have just have parties there, and we used to sleep on the roof, and I don't know, it was just so different. And now you couldn't sleep on the roof because there'd be like 2,000 people watching you, and couldn't really have a party because it'd be disturbing all the neighbours and all that stuff. So yeah, it's obviously going to be very different living there now.
It's a definitely different experience, and I suppose in that day that would have been a cheap place to get a studio. So you must have graduated from your course.
Yeah, I was doing architecture at the Bartlett, and a tutor of mine lived on the top floor, and that's how we heard about it. And at that point, the East End was quite a long way away. So, we found out about the second floor and took that on, and I think we were paying £75 a week.
Wow.
Near my flatmate. It was an empty shell. And, we put water and kitchen, bathroom, heating in, and
that was your studio as well, was it?
And then we took on another floor because there were these leatherwork manufacturers who did a runner, and so then it's empty. So we took that on as well, and that's where we worked from.
It's amazing to think about that process of gentrification that you're part of, and we were part of. And the people that preceded us as well. The leather workers around Brick Lane and Redchurch Street. There was veneer shops.
Yeah.
And sort of people making stuff.
Yeah. Well, when I moved in, My grandfather, who was a tailor in the East End, was like, what are you doing? You know, our families spent their lives trying to get out of that place, and you're moving back in. And you know, even my grandfather's second wife, my step-grandmother, who's still alive, her family had a sweet shop in Cheshire Street, which used to be called Hare Street. So, you know, it's sort of quite tightly interwoven with my family's history that we'd moved back as part of that sort of next wave of gentrification, really, lighting in the area. Now it's just, I can't really go back and not feel a bit upset about the way it's sort of become inaccessible.
It was such a remote place, though, and I remember sort of trying to get to, there was that one coffee shop on Curtin Road and nothing else, and like maybe one old pub somewhere, you know.
Yeah, well, there was one or two pubs that you go to, wasn't there? You know, the Maker's Arms or something.
Yeah.
And everything else is kind of off limits.
I know.
Was there a real kind of great creative atmosphere down there, though?
Yeah, there was. I mean, I think probably, I don't know when you moved in. We moved in 1996, I think. And at that point, there was the kind of creative community in Charlotte Road that was led by Joshua Compston, I think, something like that. Anyway, there were like all of is it Charlotte Road? I think was you know, all owned by or rented by artists. And then in about 1998, they quadrupled the rents, and everybody scattered across Hackney. But yeah, it was just sort of quite random sort of set of things, and you'd just sort of be walking around and, you know, hear a kind of like party going like, oh, we'll just open the door, walk in, and, you know, everyone just be kind of random set of very random people, and you'd sort of somehow fit into that.
Yeah, what a great time.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was weird and sort of derelict, empty, very urban. I remember like being in our old warehouse, feeling like some sort of Marvel comic character, of living on the sort of fringes of Gotham City, which was technically, you know, the financial district of London, but just separated by a bit of wasteland that was Bishopsgate, Goodyard, and a just whole different life existing in Brick Lane, mixed between curry houses, leather workshops, veneer shops, and artists, really.
So did you set up your studio straight from university then, or did you kind of go into practice for a while and then sort of?
I went into practice for a while. So I was in exhibition and set design. So I worked on like Millennium Dome and National Maritime Museum, and then won a competition on TV on the back of the design we did in this warehouse space. And from that, ended up working on TV. So
yeah, how was that?
Well, it was a different era. You know, at that point, there was no internet really. So, you know, if you were on TV, you were actually quite famous. So it was quite a weird double life as well. You know, people go, oh, you know, TV star living in a flat with no heating and barely bathroom. You know, so people had this very sort of distinctly different view of you, and actually the remarkably impoverished life you're really technically living. Because TV still didn't really pay very well. It's just you sort of became quite well known.
But you were part of that whole kind of explosion of interior design on the telly movement, and that raising of awareness of you know, how to upgrade spaces.
Yeah, I mean, I was sort of a little bit later to the game, but I was sort of involved in it from about 1998. Yeah, exactly. The sort of democratisation of design to a certain extent, of like, you know, you can do it. You know, because we were living at a time when people still, you know, had tools and picked up tools and, you know, put shelves up and fix their home up. They had the sort of skills handed down to them, which probably less people have. But, you know, home ownership was still probably more viable, you know, 23 years ago than it is now for people of an equivalent age.
There seems to be another wave of it kind of coming along.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it just sort of died off. They sort of, for some reason, decided to kill it off. And it's coming back, you know. There's some of the shows that I used to work on are coming back. Because, you know, it's a massive sector. It's like a massive level of interest. You know, particularly over lockdown, people realise that home's really important to them. So what you can do and the design, and obviously things like Instagram and social media just made it much more enticing and exciting. And of course, you've got influencers doing amazing things and stuff like that. So it was kind of amazing that it had dropped away. It was a bit of a mistake that somebody dropped the ball and decided to cancel it because there were too many of these shows. But
I think you're right. Through lockdown, I think lots of people are discovering what's wrong with their houses, you know, or how they don't work. Their homes are not working for them, and kind of trying to learn new skills.
Yeah.
And they've got the time to do it, I suppose. And,
Well, I think the other thing is, prior to lockdown and normal life, we had this incredible diversity of spaces that we all occupy. You might be at home, but then you would go out, you'd commute to work. Maybe that's going to walk, cycle, get on a bus or a train, might grab a coffee, go to work, spend the day at work, have lunch, then go out, maybe go to the pub, cafe, restaurant, I don't know, theatre, cinema, come home, and you'd had all this kind of rich experience of space. And now it's just like, I'm at home, 9, 10, 24 hours, whatever, surrounded by the same four walls. And now, I live in Brighton, and because my children and wife all work at home, they are all occupying all our workspaces. So my office is about a 5-minute cycle. So I get on my bike. I'm here in my lovely office in Brighton, which is in an old church. So
wow.
Lovely light-filled space near the seafront. So I come down here and work.
Yeah. And
somebody's got to look after all these flipping plants, haven't they?
Well,
they're amazing.
We'll have to put some pictures on something to show. I think one could be mistaken for thinking you're in some kind of tropical paradise by the looks of it.
Yeah, it's my own little tropical
very
paradise.
Green
I say that now. It's coming Friday, so it's watering day. So I just get to like 4:00. Yeah, it's the weekend. I'm going home, and it's like, oh no, hang on, I've got an hour of plant tending.
One would expect to see that behind you, given the sort of shift. If it is a shift, I don't know. What I'm interested in really with your kind of interest and the focus on biophilic design is where did that come from? Was that something that you developed a long time ago, or was it? Because it is quite a fashionable thing now, isn't it? All our students tend to go for the biophilic design as being the key sort of element of their projects. And, so they're aware of it and people are becoming increasingly aware of it, but you're making a real sort of statement in not only your kind of approach, but also the courses that you're running. But where did that stem from originally?
Personally, I grew up in Brighton and, grew up swimming in the sea, playing in the woods, and my whole childhood was kind of very nature orientated. And as I grew up, I was a scuba diver from about the age of 14, and then when I was studying architecture, I was also a windsurfing instructor in the summer. So in a way, my architectural studies were about the built environment, and the things that I love were about being in and around nature. So it kind of made sense that those two things sort of fused and go, well, why the things that I love not involved with the things that I'm also passionate about? And so, there was kind of obvious logical progression at that point. So from a professional perspective, what happened was that when I started working on TV, I was conscious that I had this incredible platform at the time. The programs I was working on had viewership figures of like 8 million people. So I thought, well, if you were going to talk to 8 million people, what would you say? Would you tell them about this year's must-have color or patterns or texture? Or would you talk about some of those sort of bigger, grander issues that design could start to fix? So I made it my mission in 1998 to talk about sustainability, particularly in the home, about energy use, about the use of natural materials, and about the opportunities to reuse and recycle. And, that was surprisingly challenging for people at the time. So I spent about 10 years trying to convince people to try and be more sustainable. But people often go like, sustainability is not really for me. And it's like, not really for you. It's just, it's about your habitable sphere on this planet now. I'll do it in phase 2. So we'd be doing all these designs and, put in the solar panels, the energy efficient products, the low energy bulbs, and they'd go like, look, I just want a bigger kitchen, mate. We'll do all that stuff phase 2. And we're like, oh God, end up with just a standard project, which was really frustrating. So what happened was I changed my conversation away from, reduce the impact of your home on the planet to how can your home support your physical and mental well-being? Because actually everybody wants to be happier and healthier. So I started to look into the sorts of things that design could do to create happier and healthier homes. And it was at that point, about 10 years ago, that I discovered biophilic design, the work of Edward O. Wilson, Stephen Kellett. And I just thought, this is it. This kind of summarizes everything that I'm passionate about in architecture, that fusing and the blending of architecture and the natural world to support physical and mental well-being. So from about that point on, I just made it my mission to try and learn as much as I could, to steer the direction of every project, to develop research and write white papers. It just made so much sense to me. The other thing that I found so fascinating was that biophilic design is an evidence-based design system, which means that it uses evidence and research compiled over the last 20 years to demonstrate the benefits of the improvement of connection to nature to different building typologies. So, the evidence that it brought up showed that actually improving connections to nature in workplaces improved productivity, creativity, and staff engagement. It encouraged staff to go and work for companies. It improved staff retention. In healthcare, patients can get better faster with less medication. They can feel less pain. In education, children can learn faster, get better test results. In retail, the perceived value of goods goes up when it's a more naturalized environment. And there was all this evidence. And so I'm going so there's all this evidence that demonstrates the value of good design and how we can do that and deliver it for our clients. Tell me again what it was that I learned in architecture school for 7 years. I learned about modernism. Okay. So where's the evidence that modernism is good? So basically it comes down to, without evidence and data, you're just another person with a good opinion. Having all that data just makes it so compelling. It actually gives you a reason to want to deliver a good design, and it's good for you, it's good for your client, it's good for building occupants.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the data-led inquiry is really powerful. But what you were saying about shifting the emphasis from sustainability, people think, oh, not my problem, let someone else sort it out, I don't care, I'm going to be dead soon, whatever, it'll be sorted out by somebody else other than me, to shifting it to their well-being and their health, which is your own personal responsibility in many ways.
Yeah,
that must have helped to tip people into that. And I think that's what we're seeing across loads of sectors, is the rise of well-being as being an important metric in terms of employee performance, and just being sane and healthy and happy at home.
Yeah, I mean, it really shifts our design thinking. Because if you think about it, look at the home around you. I mean, who designed that home? And what was their raison d'etre for the design? I mean, was it that the person living in that home would be healthier and happier? I mean, honestly, was it? I mean, look at all the design features. What suggests that? Or was it that somebody had bought a plot of land, needed to build on it as quickly as possible, and then get out? And you go well, what's going on? It makes a lot of sense that actually the buildings that we create are designed to deliver on that intended function. But of course, they're not. I mean, how could we not be building hospitals with the sole intention that people get better faster and with less medication and that feel less pain? Well, how can we not be doing that? It's, our sort of capitalist system going, minimize your costs, maximize your returns, and everyone's happy. But actually, if you think about the cost and the time frame of building something like a hospital is, let's say, a couple of years, how long is that hospital going to be there for? 50, 80, 100 years. Think about all the costs of that building in its life cycle. Surely we should be taking that long-term view and not just kind of focusing on the short-term costs. And that's the same conversation that we've been having about sustainability for ages.
There's the difficulty in measuring productivity, measuring health, measuring retention, isn't it? I think that's the issue, that people, they can work out how much it's going to cost to build, how much they can sell a plot for, but they can't work out how much an unhappy person is going to cost them in an organisation, unless
they have our handily written guide, white paper, on how to measure the impact of your design. We've written a series of white papers all about biophilic design and health and well-being. Once we start to get into evidence, what's really interesting is that there are like numerous studies that show the benefits that the elements of nature can bring to different building typologies. The problem is that all of those studies are kind of relatively abstract, aren't they? Because they happen to an organisation in another location at another time. And I think what's really important is that we've got all that stuff, and it kind of piques people's interest. It starts to suggest that actually adding plants will improve productivity and creativity and reduce absenteeism. But until you start to apply it to an organisation or a building, and you start to measure it, you haven't got real-time data. So what we're really passionate about is making sure that we don't just go, well, we've got the data from past studies, that's it, well, let's just get on and do it. We need to kind of measure it and work out how to deliver that stuff best. So that's why we wrote this all about pre and post occupancy evaluation, which is a remarkably boring sounding subject, but actually really fascinating when you get into it. And this is the sort of thing that we as designers should be doing. What's the existing situation and the problem we're trying to solve? And you get all that data. And then when you got that data, that's basically a really developed brief that comes from occupants, not just one person, as does usually happen with an architectural brief. And then what we do is we design for that feedback. And then once we've delivered the design, you take a post-occupancy evaluation, and you see if you've managed to solve that problem and how people's perception of it has changed. And you've got to measure in two different ways. One is in what we call quantitative studies. So it's the things you can literally measure and put a number to. So things like air quality, temperature, lighting levels, maybe some absenteeism, injury levels. But there's also the qualitative bits as well, which can often be surprisingly different. So it's really important to take qualitative studies. And this is like, how do you feel when you're in the space? Do you think you've been productive? Are you stressed? Are you engaging with people? How do you sleep? Do you feel stressed when you go home? What's your first feeling when you walk into the office? Are you proud of being in this place? Would you bring others to it? And the answers to those questions can be surprisingly different. But you've got to take both the quantitative aspects and the qualitative and balance that up. And that's really important if we're ever going to kind of move design on to test things, trial things, and make things better.
Do you think certain sectors are kind of picking up on it more than others? I mean, from experience working in healthcare, they really seem to get it. They really cling on, and they know the improvements that it can make to people's health, and the recovery rates are better. And like you say, your pain threshold is greater, and you don't necessarily need so many medication. But do you think that there are sectors that are really championing biophilic design?
Certainly, I think anywhere where there's a sort of commercial imperative, it's really important. And particularly where you can measure the return on investment. So I guess places like, the workplace is an obvious one. Healthcare, like you say, maybe less so domestic spaces, because it's kind of difficult. You see it's difficult to kind of form a metric. What is a happy home? Part of that might be cultural, it might be social, it might be financial. There are lots of issues there. But so what's interesting is this health and well-being movement is generally being led by the commercial sector, particularly the office, where if you can create spaces where people are happier, healthier, and more positive, open and optimistic. When they pick up the phone, they're going to be in a better frame of mind. When they have a conversation with somebody, they're going to be more open and ready to kind of share ideas, and that sharing of ideas can lead to innovation. But when you start to sort of talk about the home, it's much more difficult. You don't have those metrics so readily available. You can't measure productivity, creativity, engagement, staff retention. I found is not a question that goes down very well with my children. What we're seeing at the moment is this idea of well-being moving from the commercial sector and now being picked up in the home, because of course we're all in our homes. We're realizing our health and well-being is being influenced by the architecture that we surround ourselves with. And at the moment, that's almost 100% our home. So we're now going, well, what could I do to this place? What are the simple things? If I was going to spend some money, what would I do? And if I really wanted to go for it and do a big refurbishment, how can I improve the health and well-being of my home? So that's why we've moved to a certain extent from the commercial sector and into the domestic. We've just written a book called How to Design a Healthy Home. It comes out in May. And then we've written this online course all about biophilic design in the home, because we felt it was a relatively underexplored subject and so much opportunity to translate all that great learning from the commercial sector and into the home.
I think the course is really interesting. And what we were looking at it the other day, and Kay and I, we almost signed up for it, actually. We were quite excited by it all. What struck me was that we have a sense of what biophilic design is, but I think when you look at the course structure and the content, there's a whole load of other things. I think there's up to 14 different sections of... There's
what's called the 14 patterns of biophilic design, which are the different features that you can bring in. It's not, and you don't necessarily need to bring all of those into every space. It's about picking and choosing the ones that are appropriate to deliver on the intended function and to put people in the right frame of mind to undertake them.
Yeah,
I think as an interior designer, you you're aware of biophilic design. And I think some of the elements, natural light, materials, colour, air quality, water, acoustics, that kind of thing is kind of, those elements exist, but it's, to me, the thing that I am kind of less aware of, I guess, and is the spatial element. So, how to create the spaces that have a natural sort of feel. And I think that's probably one of the more difficult elements, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, what people say is that, particularly sort of more experienced designers, is they're already doing lots of elements of biophilic design. It's just they didn't necessarily know the overarching term and also the research that underpins it. So I think what's important, essentially it's a sort of nature or evolutionary based concept or ethos for placemaking. What is it that makes a place right for sitting and working? What is the ideal workstation? And that's a design question. How do you design it? And how do you use research to help you do that? But also, how do you create a space that helps you to relax and recuperate? What are the features that can support you to do it? For a long time, it seemed to be that, in wellness rooms were sort of blank rooms. Go into this wellness room and it's like a pristine Zen-like space. But actually, for me, that's more like sensory deprivation.
Yeah.
You ask people, where do they feel most happy, calm, and relaxed? 95% of people will think of a space surrounded in nature. They'll think of a pool of water, grass and trees and plants, blue skies, sunshine, and that's where they believe. And yet when they ask to design a space that supports mental well-being, they start to design walls and blank surfaces and a lack of texture that are so remarkably different from the natural world. So in a way, we're trying to sort of find ways of eliciting a similar emotional response to how you feel when you're in nature, but in the built environment. So if you want to sit and relax and recuperate, or maybe you position a chair near a window with a view out onto a tree. There are certain colours, such as shades of blue, which will remind you of cool, calm pools of water. We might be talking about biophilic fractals, the way we take inspiration from the level of sort of surface texture and detail in the natural world in a way that feels familiar and reassuring and calming. It might be the surrounding of plants and greenery, which have an ability to improve air quality, relative humidity, to remove toxins. They have a therapeutic quality so that you can engage with it and be more mindful in the moment, take yourself away from the pressures and stresses of everyday life. And maybe it's about your haptic journey as well. What are the sort of surfaces and textures that make you feel more relaxed? Is it a cold stone surface that may be more acoustically live? I don't know. For some it may be. Or is it a sort of warmer set of sort of padded surfaces that you can sink into that feel warm and safe and nurturing? When you talk through it, it's kind of completely obvious.
Yeah.
And a lot of it does hark back to this sort of evolutionary idea that, we survived, or humans have evolved in close connection to healthy forms of nature for hundreds of thousands of years. And so we have this ability to very quickly recognize landscapes that can support, that help us to survive, thrive, and flourish, but equally recognize a landscape that's potentially threatening. So, for instance, if you were to walk into a relatively gloomy, unloved office with lots of plants that were sort of yellow and brown and shriveled, you would immediately get a sense of an environment that is somehow choking oneself. But if you were to walk into an office that was flooded with natural light, that had natural colours and textures and patterns, that had lots of plants that were flourishing, what you tend to find is that people have an immediate smile that comes onto their face. When people walk into my office, people are like, wow, you just work in a jungle. Wow, how lucky are you? And that's kind of the response. That sounds rather simplistic, but that's the kind of response I want from my clients, is that people will walk in and just smile, And what's nice about biophilic design is that in a way, it's a sort of universal design ethos, because everybody's had a positive experience of nature at some point in their lives. And what we're trying to do is to elicit that and to pick it up and bring it into a space in a way that feels appropriate and relevant to them, that maybe contains some sense of locality that is familiar to them and makes them feel energized and stimulated, but also the opportunity to relax and to recuperate.
I think when you're talking about all those different categories, that gives you as a designer a huge potential for creating different types of space. It doesn't just have to be loads of house plants everywhere. You can talk about sensitively using materials and light and the shape of spaces. So how do you introduce this into your design approach with clients? What is there a process of running through all of those categories, or do you pick and choose?
We're great believers in the concepts of diversity, and diversity is something that's obviously sort of reared its head recently in all sorts of social movements. But of course, having a sense of rich diversity has been fundamental to creating healthy biospheres. Essentially, if you walk into a forest where there's a rich diversity of fauna and flora, you know that it's able to support itself should a disease come along and knock one of those kind of animals or plants out. And another form of nature will take its place. And I think rather similarly for human beings, when we walk into spaces that essentially is a monoculture of space and furniture, then our heart sinks. If you imagine walking into an office and going, congratulations, you got the job, you sit in row H and yours is desk 9, but don't worry, they all look the same. It's like walking into a battery farm. Can you imagine spending 9 hours of your life every single day for the rest of your life in one single desk? But when you walk into a space and you can see that there's somewhere for you to work, there's somewhere for you to have a quiet conversation, maybe a creative meeting, you can go and hang out here, there's somewhere for you to go and relax, you've got water, you've got food, you've got plants, you see that all your physical, psychological, emotional needs things met by the spaces that are in front of you, then I think people start to feel much more relaxed. So it's about understanding the many different sorts of spaces that people are likely to need, and not suggest just that people are all the same and that they can all sit in the middle of an open plan office for 9-10 hours a day for the rest of their lives. Because we're all different. There is a great level of neurodiversity and the way that we react to spaces, and giving people the opportunity to interact with the spaces that support them and their needs is really, really important to what we do.
In an urban environment, are they the most challenging projects that you have because of the lack of kind of open space and natural elements?
I think quite the reverse. It's the most exciting, because I think if you are given a space that is very urban, that doesn't have a great level of diversity, well, you've got a lot to work with there because you can only do better. So a lot of the locations where I think human-centered design and particularly biophilic design are so important and beneficial are in these urban spaces. Because you think about it, the spaces that most of us surround ourselves in, and remember that in the UK, 90% of us now live in urban environments. These environments are remarkably unnatural for the most part. They're kind of relatively dense. They're full of different sensory stimuli that to some degree are now called pollutants, whether that's sort of air quality or noise. These environments are often very geometric. They're relatively cramped. But of course, as human beings, we're quite adaptable and we can fit into them and we can squeeze into them and we can kind of work. It doesn't mean that we're actually at our best or at our happiest. So when we're given an opportunity like that, then we believe it's our responsibility to take that place and to introduce a sense of diversity. And that diversity might come in terms of the number of different spaces, the number of different types of furniture, the sort of zones that we're creating, maybe even that sense of diversity in the rich mix of plants that we introduce into the space. And look for opportunities to create that sort of that experiential richness for occupants.
That sounds really nice, and I just think there's a whole shift in how to approach a project there from what we were probably used to doing years ago, which would be creating a look and a feel, based on what was fashionable, or that sort of draw your inspiration from the latest exhibition you've been to, that kind of process, which has its place, to a more, like you say, human-centered, which is all about tapping into emotional responses and the psychology of space, and that becomes really difficult to get your head around, So that journey of understanding for designers is, I think, quite difficult. But are we all moving in the same direction? I think there's a sort of, it feels like there's a zeitgeist of well-being and mental health awareness and diversity. And I like the way you talk about diversity. You want, diversity of space, diversity of materiality, takes a whole new perspective.
Perhaps as well, there's a reaction to what was kind of flooding the market, say 10 years ago. Everything was very white and stark, and you had to have a white box and grey furniture, and all the surfaces were grey and white. And it kind of, as we're moving forward and we are thinking about our mental health and well-being more and more, and it's kind of becoming the hot topic, the thought of being in such stark spaces, it's kind of not conducive to, as you say, feeling happy and at ease in a space.
Yeah, I think there's a marked shift in what we believe the value of design is. I think for way, way too long, design has been seen as a sort of luxury. It's a way of buying into something that reflects something out about you, a message out about yourself. I bought the latest Gucci handbag, I've got a flashy car, I've got the latest smartphone, watch, whatever. And this idea that design is used solely for personal expression, of personal identity, power and wealth, has always filled me with a certain level of dread and unease. Because coming from an architectural background, the functionality of design is something to behold, and getting a design right and making it work for you is so important. And I think particularly in the world of interior design, which is often seen as the realm of, the designer thing or the designer that, it's just sort of, it's kind of so disgusting that it should just be that realm of it has to be expensive. So what we do is we kind of talk about, that old style of design thinking as being relatively extrinsic. It's using design as a means to express power, wealth, status, identity. And we're turning it around and go, well, no, actually design is a remarkably powerful tool. What if we turned it into an intrinsic approach and said, everything I design in here has been put in to make you feel as good as possible. So what is this chair? What's this bed? What's this bedroom? How is a bathroom going to help you? Not, show your friends. And of course, in lockdown, this whole idea has been exacerbated. I've got a whole wardrobe full of my favorite suits that I haven't worn for about a year. I just don't need to wear a suit. But we're wearing the clothes that we love, that make us feel comfortable and relaxed, that help us to deliver on our days. And I think, we've realized similarly that design can do that, and that we should be turning this approach around. And I think for many students, it's a sudden revelation that actually design can be used as a force for good, as a means to combat climate crisis, as a means to support physical and mental well-being. And at that point, it suddenly becomes really interesting and really useful, and not just a nice thing to have as a means to show off, but an essential part in how you create happy, healthy, proper functioning spaces that deliver on their intended function.
I love that. I absolutely love that. I mean, the perception, it kind of breaks my heart when you hear, I don't know, perhaps friends or that are not in the industry, and how they assume that if you're a designer or an interior designer or an architect, that you're always working on flashy, high-end residential properties that are kind of, extreme amounts of money, and it just breaks my heart. I mean, there's a time and a place for all design, but design to make a difference to people's lives is just the thing that should be out there, and we should be recognised for it.
Yeah, it's one of the. I mean, my working life has never been about that sort of high-end, super flash design. And as difficult as it has been working on some TV programs, the likes of DIY SOS has been really fascinating, because it's the opportunity to bring considered design thinking to people that would never normally be able to access it. So, yes. You'd go and meet a family whose lives have fallen apart because of injury or illness, and you'd find a way to reconfigure their home to suit their needs. And not just, the physical layout and the ergonomics of a home, but also to connect them with things that will bring them together. And create a greater palpable level of happiness in a home that had otherwise separated them. And for me, that was just, so wonderful to be able to work on these, very ordinary little homes, but to say, look, there's potential in everything. That we're going to do as much as we can to deliver on sorting this house out so that it works for you, but also on a more or sort of social level to bring you together with the things, activities that you really love. And so that has always been, probably, the most sort of satisfying aspect of my sort of TV career is kind of delivering design to those groups of people that would never normally be able to access that level of thought.
It's a great way to send out that information, in a form that people can access really easily. And I guess the issue with us as designers is we're trying to make a living, and design fees for our expertise aren't always the cheapest option, are they? And investing in design, people don't really haven't seen the value of that. Maybe it's changing, but I think the way in which you're talking about your course, which gives people access to the tools and the knowledge in a relatively sort of cost-effective way, is a great way to spread that knowledge and give people the opportunity to take control, where they may not be able to afford to get a designer in, but they can actually do things themselves. And that's empowering, really powerful.
A lot of the work that we have done over the last few years, like these white papers that we've written with Interface, has been, very open source about us having the skills and the time to go and research all this stuff, to collate the knowledge and then to interpret it and then to put it out there for people just to download for free. So, yeah, and I think we are moving, of course, to ever more open source sort of forms of communication. If you've got a great idea, now's the time to share it. You don't want to hold on to this, thinking that, at some point it will become an essential part of your life, because, we're at such a critical time in terms of climate and urbanization and humanity that now's the time that designers should be getting out there and communicating their best ideas and making them open and available, and trusting that the sharing of those ideas will elevate you in your position, and good things will come from it.
One of my all-time favorite projects that I've worked on, and it wasn't necessarily something that kind of looked the biz or anything, but it was an SEN school, and they moved from this dilapidated, awful building, which, was unfit for purpose, and they moved into a new facility, and the spatial arrangements just worked for them so well, and it made such a difference to the kids' lives. It was magical. They're the kind of projects that really make you feel good.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah. We worked on a similar sort of project for an autistic school in Hackney in London, where it was a very small wedge-shaped room. And what the teachers were telling us was that the children were getting sort of overwhelmed by the stresses and strains of interacting with other children and noise in the playground. So they said, we've got this little room. What we'd like is somewhere for the children to go, to relax, to recuperate. But we couldn't add any plants because the children the level of autism meant that the children would shred the plants completely. So we used the kind of biophilic design principles of prospect, retreat, but also there's some of those sort of indirect references to nature and the materials and colours and textures to fill this room, and to create a space where the children could sort of gaze out onto the playground and see the activity without being overwhelmed, or to cocoon themselves in a little niche, but also to engage themselves in the sort of interactive features and the natural materials and textures. And it was so fantastic seeing the children come into this space and immediately look around and go, I could climb up into this little niche, and we carpeted these niches so that it just sounded really safe. Or they could just sit and gaze out onto the activity, which is fascinating for them, but they didn't want to be in it. Or they could just be, playing with these little interactive features. And it was just this really lovely project. If you look on our website, it's called the Garden School Project. And I think there's a film in our blog about it as well, that it's just sort of captures, for me, it sort of captured the success of that project. And it wasn't, it was probably the smallest project we've ever done, but so satisfying just to see their reactions. It was wonderful.
That's the great joy of it. Actually, I was on site yesterday with a project, and the clients were in, and it was the building site, but they could see the shape of the space evolving, and they were getting really excited. And you think, well, that's good, isn't it? I've helped shape that, and these people are going to benefit. And I think that's when you dig into why we're doing it all. It took me a long time to work out why I was doing this. I've followed that route of going to art college, selecting a creative course, trying to earn a living without probably knowing why I'm doing it, other than that's all I can do sort of thing. But actually in the last few years, that idea of how you can use design to help people and change people's perception of their lives and how they can take control, and that's really powerful and part of why I'm in for it, and seeing that example. I'll put some links on the notes for these projects, Oliver, so that people can go to it. But seeing the impact of design is really exciting, I think, and that's what gives me the buzz about it. The launch of the course, then, it's been up for a week or two, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, about 3 weeks.
Yeah, and how's that going?
We've had a really good response, actually. It's been it was really exciting.
Is this the first time that you've run a course?
Well, I've been teaching biophilic design for about 7 or 8 years. So over that time, I've probably done sort of 350 seminars, but also interactive workshops and things. So really, a lot of what we were doing was transferring that kind of commercial approach into the domestic space, and then writing it down. So not dramatically different, other than it's sort of just on a different medium. We had an amazing response, and actually really global as well. So we've had sort of responses from North and South America, across the UK, Europe, Far East, Middle East, Far East, and Australia. So literally from all over the world, people are sort of picking up on it. So yeah, it's been a really great response. And then people are sort of now working their way through the course. So we're just starting to get a bit of feedback, which has all been, very positive. I'm
very interested in the logistics of that. Does it take much of your time to manage the process? I know that if people sign up for the kind of top of the range one, they get a consultation. So that's
that's like a 2-hour consultation. Yeah. So basically, having gone through the course, we do a sort of 2-hour consultation where if people have got like a student project or a dissertation, or maybe they've got a live project they want to talk through and sort of second check the ideas, or see if they've kind of incorporated anything, or kind of investigate other ideas, then we have a kind of live consultation. So I've done one of those now with a client in Milan, which was really interesting. Because you also get to sort of hear about, the situation and the approach and people's general feeling about biophilic design in those countries as well. So there's that. And then the kind of the standard course is basically takes about 24 hours to complete, but you can do it over a 12-month period. And then there's an introduction as well. So that's kind of the intro to biophilic design.
And you're talking about the response from across the globe. Are there any nuances in how people approach biophilic design? In different regions?
I think that's one of the interesting things about it is it's not a prescriptive aesthetic. We're not saying you've got to do it like this. It's really about people forming their own design approach to it around what's essentially a framework that is focused on human health and well-being. And I think what's important is that it is about locality, and about looking around you. What is it around you that you can draw on to elicit that emotive response? So you can imagine, to talk about an extreme, the sort of quality of an environment from a Scandinavian country being a lot more about sort of forests and rocks and lakes and fjords, being significantly different to the approach of biophilic design to a Middle Eastern country, where it's sort of much hotter and more arid. And how you might approach those two different approaches, how you might approach those two different sort of localities. So we do encourage people to look around them and go, well, what is it? What does this mean to you? And in the course, what we get people to do is to set up a Pinterest account and then to kind of pick images that reflect their approach and feeling about the different 14 patterns. And I think that's really important that we help people build their own vision of biophilic design, that we're not telling them it's got to be like this.
Yeah, one would expect it to have a kind of palette of materiality, I suppose, that was...
Yeah, colours, materials, experiences, all sorts of things, yeah.
Is there any difference in the way different cultures perceive nature or value it?
Just from a sort of general experience, what I've seen is that, in the United States, that the general level and understanding and awareness of biophilic design is quite high. And that may have come from a very sort of analytical or maybe sort of legal perspective in terms of there being a need for employers to deliver health and well-being in the workplace, not just as a means to attract talent, but also to keep them happy and healthy, to reduce absenteeism. So they're very sort of analytical. Then you talk about, forest-based cultures, let's say like Scandinavia, where there is a sort of cultural affinity towards it, because in a way, just within a generation or two, they've moved from living off the land to finding oil and becoming much more urbanized. So actually, when I travel, and I've worked in Norway, nearly everybody that you meet has a cabin in the woods somewhere that they go to that is sort of absolutely fundamental part of their family's history and part of their well-being. They just escape to the cabins at the weekends. And then in the Middle East, in the Far East, in the Middle East, it's sort of interesting because they often see the outside world as being relatively hostile. When you talk in Dubai about natural light, they go, we try and reduce it as much as possible, because when you talk about natural light in the middle of the summer, you're talking about, incredible heat. So they kind of veer towards more the shade, which you wouldn't necessarily do in a Scandinavian country. And then when you talk about the Far East, let's say Singapore, they're literally talking about a city in a park or in nature. They've got the climate that can support incredible levels of green infrastructure, both inside and outside. And of course, the sort of plants and greenery that they have there are the plants that we would ordinarily bring inside. So obviously a lot of the plants that you see here are tropical. These are native to the UK and they wouldn't live outside very well. But if I took some of the plants from outside inside, they equally wouldn't live very well inside. So you can see different approaches around the world towards the kind of, social, cultural, economic, and climatic differences, and how that shapes people's perception and their relationship to nature.
What's coming next then? What's your next big challenge?
So that's a good question. Well, we're still relatively early in the kind of birth and the movement of biophilic design. For many people, they only would have heard about it in the last 3 years. It only really sort of evolved in the 1980s. And if you think about, the lifespan of modernism, still it's a relatively young, unaccepted movement. And still we're seeing neoclassical homes being built for some reason. So we're clearly quite slow on the uptake of design trends. But what is being seen is that the money speaks, and with us being able to deliver a really clear business case on what design for health and well-being and biophilic design can offer, then I think the uptake is potentially very fast, particularly if we combine it with this movement for sustainable design. Because actually what we kind of believe is that, to create a successful building, we need to reduce that building's impact on the environment, but also consider the impact the building has on the human beings, because a majority of buildings are designed for human occupation. So to create truly sustainable buildings and a built environment, we've got to be delivering on both of those. So I think for the last 20 years, we've been really focusing on that carbon-centered approach. And now this human-centered element is kind of picking up speed and momentum, and the recognition that you need to be delivering on both of those. Not just in our homes or in our streets or our neighborhoods, but also on a citywide level and also nationally. What's our response to nature? And a deeper recognition that our health and well-being is intrinsically connected to the health and well-being of nature around us. So is that something that starts on your desk or in your garden or in your park or in your national park or maybe globally? So, I think there's a lot of work still to be done to recognize the value that nature brings to our lives.
I'd like to thank Oliver for taking the time to speak to us. We're really impressed by his approach, which puts people at the centre of the design process and shifts the thinking of design towards creating spaces that support and nurture the users within them, where health and well-being becomes one of the most important metrics of a successful design. There's some links to his website and the online course that he's set up in the show notes. Oliver's interest in research and disseminating information can be seen in a set of white papers. There's again links to those on the show notes. They're available on the Interface website. Many of Oliver's projects show the diversity of approach that biophilic design offers. It's not just about putting plants into spaces. His work demonstrates a sophisticated level of application of materials and spaces and how that can really improve the experience of people. That's something we're promoting at the University of Plymouth on our interior design course. If you'd like to know how to be a kick-ass interior designer, follow the links in the notes. We're hoping to get Oliver down to talk to us later in the year, where he'll be able to pass on his knowledge and experience to our students. I'd like to thank Dave Clark from I Am The How for production support and invaluable advice in the setting up of this podcast, Kay Hanson for her planning support and co-hosting role in this and the educational podcasts from the University of Plymouth, and Mark Frith for the music. If you're interested in finding a little bit more about Mark, I'd check out the Friday covers. There's a link in the notes. Really like to hear your feedback on the podcast. Leave a comment and get in touch by the website or on Instagram. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.